Okay, welcome. This week's hands-on is on the File Server Resource Manager. A very cool tool. If you've ever been a system administrator, you'd love this tool. Before we get started though, let's add an extra disk onto our server. So the server has to be shut down, not powered up. And I'm going to go to settings, and we're going to go down to, the storage like we did before. Except right now it shows we have one disk and then one empty drive letter. So there's a little thing right here that says add hard drive or hard disk. That's what I'm going to click. And then it says, okay, well, here's the ones that we got. It's like, yeah, I don't care about that. I want to create a new one. So I'm hitting create. And then you go through the same thing, but what type and whether it's dynamic. I'm going to give it a kind of a cool name. I'm going to call it like server extra or something like that. We don't have to do that, but just some sort of a name that I could look at. So about server extra disk. And I'm going to make mine 32 because quite frankly, we're not going to be putting a lot of stuff there. It's okay. So I've given it kind of sort of a meaningful name, something that means something to me. And I gave it 32. I'm going to go ahead and hit the button and presto changeo. So I'm going to choose that guy. And so now I have two hard drives. The original one, server one, and then this extra guy here. Okay, so we're kind of sort of done. All we have to do now is start our guy. So, you know how if you did this in Microsoft 10 or any modern version of the operating system, is it going to automatically detect this new disk and come up and say, hey, what do you want me to do? Or is it going to come up and say, oh, yeah, sure, whatever, dude. Let's see. Okay, we're rebooted. And then CIS4376, parents, 2022, close parents. And let's just see what it's going to do. Any pop-up messages saying, hey, we discovered a new disk. You've got some tasks to perform. Darn. Okay, so I basically have to do this by hand. Not a big deal. I'm going to go do a right click on the start menu and bring up disk management. And then it says, oh, I see you have a new disk. Like, yeah, okay, thank you. And so it's going to ask me for some very, simple kind of questions. So one of them is going to be, do I want a master boot record? No, I want a modern thing. I want a good partition table. That kind of makes sense. I'm going to hit OK. And then here I am with my guy. I tell you what, I'm gonna redo that over again. Okay, just bear with me for a second. So I'm going to do a right click on this guy and bring up properties. Because you could actually have, well, okay, maybe not. Okay. So I've got this guy out there, but he's unallocated. And so now what I need to do is to initialize the disk. Okay? So I've set the partition style, and now I need to initialize the disk. All right, so I'm going to click on, the guy. I guess you could click here, but I'm going to click over on this guy, and, how do I want to go about doing this guy? Right click, and then I want to say I want a new simple volume. Okay, that kind of makes sense. And it brings up the wizard and says, okay. So how big do you want it? Well, I'm going to use all of it, so that's pretty obvious. Do I want to assign a drive letter? Yeah, let's go ahead and assign a drive letter, and I want it to be, well, actually, I want it to be D. Well, that means I got to stop here and change the drive letter of the other guy. All right, let's do that. Let's just stop, okay? So, drive letter for my existing CD-ROM. Okay, he's currently D, but I don't want him to be. So I'm going to do here, and I'm going to change drive letter. I'm going to change this guy. I want him to be E. Yeah. And now I'm going to go back to this guy. Start over again with a new simple volume. Got the guy. And now I want it to be D. Kind of makes sense. And then you're going to have a choice on whether or not you want to format this guy with the NTFS. Now, Refus is new and is pretty decent, and it's actually better in a lot of respects. However, it does not support the thing we're talking about, the File Server Resource Manager. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave that alone. And the volume label, this is kind of sort of a you know, I'm just going to say, you know, data drive or something like that. It doesn't really matter what you put here. That's my volume label. Okay, and then it says, okay, we're going to create a simple volume, da 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 da. Hit the button, and it doesn't take very long. We're done, okay? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just close this guy down, and let's go see what we got, okay? So I go here, and I'm just going to go to this PC. I got a drive D. Do I have anything in there? Is it completely empty? Well, kind of, sort of, completely empty. Remember how you can set this thing to view and see the system-related files? Remember all that? Okay, I'm going to kind of sort of do that again. So, you know how you can go in here under View and say, I want to see all this stuff. I want to see hidden. I want to see all this stuff. And you can even go in and say, I want to see all of the other things, like the where it says hide protected operating system files. I'm going to undo that. It's like, yeah. Okay, now I can see absolutely everything on my D drive. Yay! Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and just create some folder structures here, right? Because we're going to need them in just a minute. So I'm just going to go to New and do Folder and do Home. And underneath Home, I'm going to put folders for two of the users we just created. We created a user called John Smith not too long ago, and we had one called Jane Doe, if I remember correctly. So I'm going to do Jane Doe. Later on, we're probably going to make these their personal home folders, okay, that only they can see, but not right now. Okay, kind of makes sense. So I've got Drive D, and I've got a home, and I got all the rest of this stuff. Okay, so I think we're in pretty good shape. Let's start the File Server Resource Manager. Dun, dun, dun. Well, just like anything else, it's a role you have to install, so no surprise here. Wait for the little ribbon to finish doing its thing. And we'll step through. The only thing weird is it's kind of hard to find. It's under File and Storage Services, and then you have to keep drilling, and then finally you'll end up with this guy called File Server Resource Manager. That guy. It kind of sort of, it takes longer than you would expect, believe it or not. So I'll kind of pause the video during this. Okay, that didn't take too long. So we close the guy, and so I should have a new set of things here under this, right? I should have a new guy. But I'm not going to go in that way. I'm going to go in the way we normally would. I'm going to do, Start, and go to Administrative Tools. And then I should have a new one in there called File Server Resource Manager. Okay, before we get much further, let's talk about what this guy does for a living, because it is pretty doggone cool. All right, so one of the things it can do is you can set up quotas on individual folders. I could have a folder that say, look, all you people who are using this shared folder, you can only, the maximum I'm going to allow in here is 10 gig. That's it. So if you start dumping stuff in here, you're going to have to start taking things away before you can add more stuff to it. So I mentioned that if you've ever been a system administrator on a Windows system, that is something that drives you nuts, is that people just use network services as a dumping ground for everything. Okay, so having quotas is a fantastic idea. It keeps people from abusing the system. The other one is a file classification scheme. You know how in a Word document, well, I don't have Microsoft Word up in here, but you can add certain attributes onto a Word document. You could go in and say, well, I want to make this thing a new classification system. So I just want to call it, security clearance. And then we'll have, secret and top secret. So for example, I'm just going to go to a file, and I'm just going to bring this guy up, and I'm going to go to Properties, and I have a new tab here called Classification. Now, there's nothing in it because we haven't set it up yet, but you would set up like whether or not this is secret or top secret or whatever you want, for official use only, not classified, whatever you want. And this would be an attribute that gets added to files, and then you could have it so that with some extra wizardry, which I'm not going to demo today, that, for example, if you were to grab this thing that was secret and try to drag and drop it onto your desktop, even though you have write permission on the desktop and read permission on the file share, it's going to come back and say, I'm sorry, the classification systems doesn't match, and therefore you cannot copy this file. This would prevent you from, for example, plugging in a USB drive and start copying things off of a SharePoint server that had a bunch of top secret documents on it, right? Because the classification scheme would not allow you to copy it. You could read it all day long. You could do all sorts of other stuff, but you won't be able to copy. So that's a very cool thing, don't you think? All right, another one basically is this thing called file expiration. You could create a folder structure someplace called expired and find all files that are just ancient, okay? You're like, no one has even looked at it in the last year, or maybe 2 years, or 10 years, whatever it is. And so it would automatically go through and pull those things out of a live volume and put them into this extra folder called expired. Now, you could set it up. Remember we talked about tiered access, okay? Where you could have fast disk and slow disk, where you could configure it so that you have, maybe an optical drive or something, tape drive, something that, it's not very fast, but it's durable. And so that stuff would go over to that guy. And so automatically, you don't have to do anything. It just automatically expires things and pulls them over. People still be able to get to them, but they won't be able to get to them quite as fast. The other one is file screening. All right, we had a problem where people were, bringing music in, and, they would bring in 5 or 6, CDs and rip the CDs and pull all the MP3 files off and store them on their machines. And they were just consuming tons and tons and tons of resources for no legitimate business reason. And then to make it worse, they would drag and drop them off on their file shares. And it's like, oh man. So file screening will allow me to say, no, these type of files based upon their extension, like an MP3 file, these type of files are not allowed on the network. Okay, it'll frustrate the heck out of people. But once again, if you've ever been a system administrator, you're going to spend an awful lot of time trying to keep people from abusing the file shares, because they're going to look at it as, woohoo, look at this, I got all this free space, I'm going to dump everything in the world in there, and I'm not going to bother to clean it up ever. That's how they do it. I'm just telling you. Okay, so let's continue. So, let's start with the thing on the quotas. The quota is a little bit more complicated. The quota system is by folder or volume. You could do an entire volume, or you could do it by folder. Not per user, okay? This system won't allow me to say, John and only John, you can only have 1 gigabyte of storage. It doesn't work that way. But you can kind of mimic that if you created like home folders I was mentioning. So we go here, and I got a home folder, and then I go to John Smith. And if John Smith was the only one who had write permission here, well, then I effectively have set up a quota for John. I mean, it's not true, right? The quota is actually by the folder, but if just coincidentally he was the only one who could write there, well, then I have put a quota on him. Make sense? Okay, good. So that's what we're going to do. I want to set it up so that John Smith was going to be limited to 10 gigabytes is the total he could put in to his particular folder. So how rough do you want to be on poor old John? Do you want to have it so that you just get a warning saying, now, you're getting pretty doggone close to the limit here? Or do you want to say, I'm sorry, you've exceeded the limit. You're going to have to start taking things away. So one is called a soft quota. We don't actually do anything. All it does is just send a notice. And then a hard quota is, I'm sorry, you've exceeded the limit. You're going to have to go in and remove something before you can add any more files. That kind of making sense? Okay. So I'm going to go back to this guy, and I'm going to right-click on Quota Management. I'm going to go to Quotas, and I'm going to hit Create Quota. And it's a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark.